Míle maith a chathaoirligh agus fáilte agus faoiara tá cothramíocht inscinna le feicálaigh an murd so cógáirdegus. You're very welcome at last. We have gender equality and perhaps just a little bit in excess of gender equality, so it's very welcome to see it. It's my first time seeing it in almost 2 years. And also congratulations on the clear accounts, with the exception of the procurement, which we might come back to later. And it's such a broad range. And obviously climate change is major, which I would ask, Chair, you might tell me when I'm halfway through, because I want to ask some practical questions in relation. I'm going to start with Mr. Griffin. You talked about landfills, so I'm going to start with some practical questions and maybe come back to climate change, bearing in mind that the EPA have just confirmed in their air quality report for 2016, and again I'll be asking for your reaction to this, and they confirmed that the European Environment Agency estimated that a figure of 1,500 premature deaths in Ireland in 2014, 1,510 premature deaths. So obviously they're going by World Health Organization standards, which are thankfully very high, but we'll come back to that. So just in relation to landfill remediation, and in your accounts, page 21. I'll just clarify some things for me here in relation to the land remediation. And the estimate provision was substantial and the outturn was much less. And then there's a note down here of the reason why there's a delay. So, and there's a report referred to, a consultant's report. So can you explain that to me? There was a delay because of a consultant's report and there was a delay because of complexity. So how many remediation projects are we talking about in total? How many were delayed? Yeah. Please. So and just again, if you could just give me the answers, I'd appreciate. Yeah.
So I'll be guided by yourself, Deputy, because when you focus on 2016, you get one part of the picture. Yeah. When you broaden out, you get a different perspective. But I'll be guided by yourself in terms of the amount of information you want. So there was an underspend in 2016, I think an underspend of about 41% as against what we had expected to expend in 2016. And I suppose when you look at the nature of the beast that you're dealing with, and I mean your colleague Deputy Murphy will be very familiar with this in relation to Kurdistown. These are very complex projects. They require statutory consent before proceeding. They have to observe relevant procurement rules. They may also be involved in complex legal cases, and that is the case in relation to a number of them. There is a need for a technical assessment to be undertaken in relation to each individual project that we're proposing to fund, to ensure that A, we understand the nature of the problem, B, we understand the options that are available, C, we understand that stakeholder engagement has taken place, that we know that funding is available and that we have a very clear handle on the scope of works we're proposing to fund. But looking at 2016 specifically, there were 6 projects that we had proposed to fund to a greater extent than actually occurred in 2016. First one was Kurdistown and Kildare. The delay arose because of time taken to prepare the planning application, the EIA and the waste licence application. Fingal Harriers in Tomool, County Meath was the subject of ongoing legal action. Stack Allen in Slane, County Meath was the subject of ongoing negotiations between the site liquidator and Meath County Council. Portlaw Cotton Mill in Waterford County didn't make the progress anticipated. The site's in private ownership as the complex character involving environmental, heritage and social interests. And the final one that didn't progress to the extent that the local authorities and ourselves had expected was Shannon Vermiform. So you can see delays, and from our perspective, we want this to happen as quickly as possible in terms of the remediation action that is required, because this has very significant impacts on the local communities, significant impacts on the environment, potential significant impacts on water courses. And, as I said, if you take 16 in isolation, we wouldn't be satisfied with the level of progress made, but there are justifiable reasons there why it didn't progress in the way that we had foreseen. And the picture is probably a lot better when you look at it in its broadest sense. If you go back to the genesis of this, which is a European Court of Justice case back in 2012, where they found against Ireland in relation to systemic problems with aspects of our waste system, including in particular the extent of legacy local authority dumps and illegal landfills. There was a commitment given at that time by the government that programme measures would be put in place. Part of that programme of measures would be to provide funding for the remediation of these landfills. And of the 58 or so that were part of that case, I would say in excess of 40 have now been completed. So we're left with a number that have yet to be addressed, albeit some of them quite complex. So we would expect, in relation to those 6 that we've identified, that progress will be made during the course of 2017. Money has been provided in the vote for that, and indeed we have provided money into 2018 to continue the programme of works.
58 legacy sites?
There are roughly 50.
50?
At that point.
At that point.
At that point. And that's a very important statement to make, because if you look at the work that was done in 2015 then as part of the regional waste management plans, when they're updated at that point, the local authorities did a further assessment in relation to whether or not there were additional landfills that would fall into that category. And each of the 3 regional waste management plans have identified legacy landfills of a high, medium and low risk categorisation. The ones that fall into the high-risk categorisation are 70 or 71. I'm not sure exactly what the figure is. They're spread right across the country. In your own county, you have South Park in Galway City, you have Gort, you have Newin, you have Glenamaddy, you have Tuam, Rinkippin, and you have Portumna. So that kind of level of problem is still reflected right across the state. So while our focus initially was in dealing with the cases that were the subject of the European Court of Justice finding, we will have to continue a programme of remediation works for the foreseeable future. We are working with the local authorities, with the CCMA.
Just one second, Mr. Griffin, just to get this right. There were 50, we call them identified.
Yes.
Separate from that, there's an ongoing process of looking at all landfill sites. Is that right?
So there were 50 that were originally identified, roughly 50, as part of the European Court of Justice
that's
case.
Okay. And then you go forward then and you say working with the local authorities, they're looking, and you mentioned South Park.
Yeah. So what the local authorities would be required to do as part of the regional waste management plans is to update that assessment and to see whether there are additional sites within their locality that will require further remediation work.
And how many have been identified so far?
So the high priority sites across the state, 71.
High priority?
Yeah.
And are you saying that South Park in Galway is included in that?
Well, that's what I have based on the regional waste management plan.
That's in the high priority list for a former...
Yeah, I'm presuming category A is high risk. There's an A, B and C categorisation.
So there's 71 in the high risk?
Yes.
And then how many in the medium and low?
If you look at the totality of the sites that have been identified, you're talking of about 500.
500?
Yeah.
So major problem.
Well, no, you have to appreciate that this is there's a risk ranking that has been put in place. So the area that we will want to focus in on is the 70. And what we're trying to do with the Counties and City Managers Association and the EPA is to develop a roadmap for, first of all, undertaking the technical assessments that we required on those additional 70, and then developing a risk ranking in terms of the remediation that we required and the funding that the state will have to commit to it.
I'm actually reduced to no words in relation to Galway and South Park, because certainly I wasn't aware that it was on a high risk, and now there are 70 in that high risk.
There are 70.
Yeah,
so
South Park is a park. It's on a high risk for a former
the categorisation that they have in the waste management plan for the Western Border region is an ABC
Yeah, no, that's okay.
I'm assuming A is
no, that's
equivalent
okay.
to the high risk that they have in other counties.
Okay. And these ones that the ones that you've identified, are they public or private?
I don't have that breakdown.
Would you be able to get that breakdown?
I will indeed, yeah.
Okay. And in relation to the ongoing remediation in Galway, the former site, have you
On
up
the
to
major
date?
former site in Galway?
Yeah. On the Headford Road. If someone else could have the number of landfills currently in use in Ireland.
Let me come back to you on that. I think I have a note on it. But
okay, so there are two questions there. How many are existing landfills?
Yeah.
And the former landfill in Galway, where are we at in relation to that? Where would that appear?
This is in Kilconnell.
No, in Galway City.
Okay, no,
yeah, that's okay. We'll come back to it. I won't. Thanks very much.
I'll either come back later or else I'll provide a note.
Okay, lovely. In relation to the land remediation at the silver mines,
yes,
which is a major remediation problem.
Yes.
Again, what concerned me here is it's envisaged that funding will become available to complete the final phase. Now, what is the extent of the remediation works that are necessary there?
So, in relation to silver mines, we've spent about 11.2 million
to date. To date.
On remediating 5 of the 6 areas in the silver mines area. So we've done a significant programme of work both on environmental management and on remediation. As I said, we've spent 11.2 million.
And what's the cost of the ongoing monitoring of it?
So it's environmental monitoring ongoing, and we have remediation works.
There are two things.
There are two separate things.
So you've spent 11.2 million to date on remediation work.
Yeah.
And what's the cost of the ongoing monitoring? Listen, I'm going to leave those practical questions with you because just let me put my questions because they're really just practical questions.
Yeah.
One is the cost to date, which you've given to me. The second one is the cost of the ongoing monitoring. The third is why isn't the work being completed? Why is it subject to funds available, please? Why is that?
For the silver mines?
Yeah.
So for the silver mines, there is the cost of the final piece of the work relates to the Garryard tailings site. It's a distinct and separate phase. It's not deemed critical to the overall success of the work completed to date. There's about 10 million required to do that. We don't have a budget yet agreed to complete this work. And we need to undertake a review of the works required to remediate Garryard to get a final figure of that on that. So that's the silver mine site. So we have done the bulk of the work that is required in the silver mine site.
But there's remaining work to be done at a cost of 10.
A cost of 10 million,
10
but
million.
It's not deemed a priority. Not deemed a priority set of works. And there's further analysis to be undertaken to determine the scope and nature of the works that are required.
When is that going to be done?
That'll be done over the next couple of years.
Next couple of years?
Yeah, as funding becomes available.
I'll leave it to my colleagues to go back on that. In relation to RTE and the funding to RTE and post, the anticipated collection of the licensee fee was much lower, isn't that right?
So the anticipated collection of the license fee was
6.4 million.
Yeah.
Okay, why was that?
So I suppose first of all, it's very hard to predict in any given year what the level of sales are likely to be. I mean, if you look at the trends between 2008 and 2016, just to give you a few figures to illustrate the variability in the level of sales that occurs in any given year. We had a reduction in the number of licenses sold of 64,000 between 2008 and 2012. We had an increase, we had a reduction of 18,000 between 2011 and 2012.
So just a minute, Mr. Griffin. So what you're saying is when you look back, it's always variable.
It's variable. That's one reason.
Did An Post give any reason for it being reduced?
No, and I think when you look back at the figures, I mean, part of this is probably down to the economic downturn and people either not buying TV licenses and The other reason that we would have expected to see an increase, so the variability is one reason. The other reason we would expect to have seen an increase is the efforts that An Post have taken to tackle evasion. So major advertising campaign, an increase in recruitment of temporary inspectors. The other factor that we would have programmed in 2015 when we were doing the estimate was the expectation that legislation would have been brought forward and introduced in 2016 to allow the Minister procure a procurement agents. And when you saw what happened in the UK when they outsourced their collection of TV licences, the evasion rate went from about 13% to 7%. So there were a number of things that were factored in that we expected would have had an effect. And I mean, add on to that the economic growth that was expected during 2016. And when you have economic growth, people start to invest more in household goods, including television.
Mr. Griffin, no, I have enough. I have enough. Please just let me try and finish with climate change, which has come under your remit. Just tell me, in relation to climate change, we know all the reports. We've seen the latest thing from the Citizens' Assembly begging us for leadership, pointing out that there are all sorts of things. They're happy to pay increased tax, they're happy to look at carbon tax and so on. What leadership is your department shown in relation to the challenge of climate change? Where can I identify the money set? I see the energy, I see and I see underspends in relation to various items.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm finished.
You see partial underspends in some areas around climate research and so on, but what you've seen in the energy efficiency area, for example, is an almost doubling of the level of investment in energy efficiency between 2016 and next year. You've seen a considerable increase in the number of homes that have been completed that have been the subject of an energy retrofit. You saw in my opening remarks that 350,000 properties have been retrofitted by the state. And I think we're doing a lot of work in the department on the renewable energy front as well. You're seeing good progress being made there. We had a very ambitious target of 40% electricity for renewable energy by 2020. We're now up at over 27%. I'll talk about a couple of things that the department are doing that are very relevant to the climate agenda, but then I want to say something about other departments.
Well, let's just, I would appreciate that, but let's just start with your department.
Yeah.
Where are you based?
I beg your pardon?
Where are you based?
We are based in Adelaide Road.
Okay, and so what actions, is that a rented premises?
It's a rented premises run by the OPW.
What actions have been taken in your premises? In
the building itself?
Yeah,
we put in a new heating system which is much more energy efficiency over the last couple of years. Now I can't recall what the reduction in energy usage is, but it has made a difference in terms of the energy cost to the department. If you look at the public sector more broadly, we had a 33% target for energy.
I'd just like to look at your department for one moment, because ultimately it comes back to all of us, and you're in the lead position. I see some very welcome initiatives. I see some that I wish I had more time in terms of community ownership of renewable energy, which I hope to come back to. But let's start with your department. What changes have been made? What leadership has been shown? And what are the results?
In the building itself?
Yeah.
Okay, so in the building itself, we have, as I said, we have upgraded the heating system to make it far more energy efficient. We have taken a leadership role right across the public sector in terms of public sector energy efficiency.
Just go back to the changes you've made in relation to the energy, and just be specific for me. You've changed the heating. What are the results?
That's probably the biggest change we've made.
Well, give me the specifics of that. What are the results of that?
I don't have it.
Okay, will you come back to me about that?
I can absolutely come back.
Okay, so the next thing on a more general level, your role in leadership with the other departments.
Yes.
What?
So we put in place a public sector energy efficiency action plan. It's been in place for a couple of years. It's been updated this year. What we have seen in terms of the impact across the government sector, we have a target of 33% energy efficiency savings by 2020. We're now at 21%. So in 2015, we avoided energy spend of 154 million in the public sector by virtue of the measures that have been put in place right across the system. What we've introduced is a fairly novel approach in terms of the approach to spend on energy efficiency in government departments. So the savings that government departments accrue by virtue of investing in energy efficiency measures, they're allowed to retain that money, as been agreed with the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, and invest it in other measures. We've asked each government department to appoint an officer at a senior level, generally Assistant Secretary level, to be an energy advocate within their own departments and agencies. We co-funded upgrades of 10 national schools with the Department of Education in 2017. We co-funded with the OPW deep retrofits of 10 public buildings in 2017. We set aside funding in our own vote in 2018 to double that. So 20 schools, 20 public buildings, and they will act as demonstrations for what can be done if the money is invested.
That number of all the schools, is that?
I don't know. Of the number of national schools, I wouldn't have a figure.
So
but a very small percentage.
Very small percentage.
Like, you have to walk before you can run. And I mean, I listened to the Citizens' Assembly last week. Listened very closely to the recommendations, and a lot of the things that came out of the Citizens' Assembly we're either doing or we're planning to do. I mean, one of the issues they raised in relation to peat, for example, the support for peat in Eden Derry was phased out in 2016. The support for peat in West Offaly and Loughree will be phased out in 2019. The investment in electric vehicles and low emissions vehicles, we have a low emissions vehicle task force in place.
How many in the department have those vehicles?
How many people in the department have those vehicles? I don't know. I know the Minister drives a hybrid. I know another member of staff drives an electric vehicle.
So just let's come back to you. I'm finished. I'm being told to stop. So the comment that we must crawl, is it before we walk? We're facing a huge challenge in relation to climate change. I don't wish to put you on the spot, but I wish to see leadership in relation to it permeating to every department. That's really.
Can I finish by this by saying
you can finish? The chair will give you as much time as you like. But let me finish. Just let me finish. That's all. I don't have enough time to go through it. I wish I did, and I will come back in a second round.
But there's a suggestion in your question that there isn't leadership being shown, and I wouldn't accept that. I mean, focus on what we're doing in the building. It's a minute element of what it is that the department and the system is doing. If you look at the National Mitigation Plan that was published during the year, we've listed 60 measures that are underway that will have a very significant impact on our emissions profile within the state. We have an emissions trading scheme in place. We have a carbon tax in place, and Minister Donoghue is committed to review that next year before the next budget. We have renewable electricity support schemes. We have financial supports through the SEAI, which I've mentioned, for energy efficiency improvements. There's a lot of investment in the social housing programme and energy efficiency upgrades. We support large industries in terms of expert advice in relation to what they can do on their own energy efficiency programmes. There's investment in public transport, smarter travel initiative, biofuels obligation scheme, and that's just what's underway. And you look at what's planned: new renewable electricity support scheme, new renewable heat incentive, smart metering, further incentives for low emission vehicles, further investment in public transport. So there's an array of things that are happening right across the system. If I had a blank cheque, I'd spend a lot more on climate action, but I don't. I mean, we have to, like every government department, we have to compete for funding with health, justice, education, water. So we're comfortable that the strategic approach that has been taken in relation to addressing this issue is sound. I mentioned the National Mitigation Plan. We're doing work on the National Adaptation Framework. and we expect to see a substantial and visible ramping up of activity in relation to climate action over the next couple of years. The other thing I didn't mention, but it's linked to the work of the Citizens' Assembly, is the fact that we've established a national dialogue on climate action to try and get engagement with the public and to affect behavioural change right across the state in relation to this particular issue. Just
a comment. The people are way ahead of us on this. There's still what's coming out from government are policies. Lip service to public transport. If we look at Galway, there is no provision for light rail in the national planning framework that's on display. Absolutely no recognition that we need public transport, but that's for another time.
I think you will see some of that reflected in the National Investment Plan. Great. I can't say about Galway though.
Great.
Thank you, Chairman.